Morning, everyone. Global News is reporting Canada has a secret program that grants visas to war criminals, terrorists, security threats. 3 months before he boarded a plane in Cairo and 6 months before he made a refugee claim in Toronto, Canadian security officials deemed retired Brigadier General Khalid Saber Amalabid Zwa, sorry if I've got any of that wrong, inadmissible to Canada because of national security concerns. Zwa was a high-ranking member of Egypt's military when it orchestrated a coup of President Mohamed Morsi's government in 2013, according to the Canada Border Services Agency, CBSA. An admissibility finding would keep most people out of Canada, but it didn't stop Zwa and his wife from obtaining a valid visitor's visa from the Canadian Embassy in Egypt in April 2015. This is because, according to international government documents obtained by Global News, Canada has a secret program that allows certain high-profile foreign nationals who would otherwise be barred from entering the country due to national security concerns, war crimes, human rights violations, and organized crime to be granted special, quote, public policy entry visas so long as it is in Canada's, quote, national interests. But exactly what national interest means in relation to this policy and how the government decides who gets this kind of visa is unclear. That's because there's almost no information available about the program and the government refuses to answer questions. Details of Zwa's immigration file, including internal government documents detailing the secretive visa policy, were submitted to the federal court when Zwa challenged the government's effort to block him from making a refugee claim. In Zwa's case, visitor visas were issued after a senior official from the Department of National Defence, DND, in Ottawa wrote a letter to Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, IRCC, saying Zwa and his wife should be given visas to avoid upsetting Canada's relationship with Egypt's military. This type of national interest letter can be issued by any federal department or the head of a Canadian mission abroad, such as an ambassador or high commissioner, according to an unpublished government operational bulletin contained in Zwa's federal court file. These letters, the bulletins show, are valid for up to 24 months, are good for multiple trips to Canada, including personal and official travel, and are issued when the CBSA has completed a security screening and determined that the danger to Canada is low. Quote, "It is in our interest to maintain constructive relationships with members of the Egyptian military, as these relationships enable execution of Canadian Armed Forces operations in the region, most notably Operation Calumet." I think that's how you say that. Read a letter sent by DND Assistant Deputy Minister for Policy Gordon Venner prior to Zwa being given a visa. Okay, I just want to show you, here's a link to Operation Calumet? And it says, mission mandate. The mission of the MFO is to supervise the implementation of the security provisions of the Egyptian-Israeli Treaty of Peace and to employ best efforts to prevent any violations of its terms. So hold on a second. This is a peacekeeping mission? And we're helping the Egyptians maintain a peace with the Israelis? And so we have to give them a visa? Really? Okay. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. Maybe there's more to it than that, but it seems like a pretty flimsy excuse. Like, we've been there since 1985, September 1985 to now. So we better give that guy a visa, otherwise, they might pull that. They might say, no more, get out, Canada. We'll do our own peacekeeping, thanks. Weird, right? The government, meanwhile, will not provide any details. This looks unintentionally hilarious, by the way. I was like, are you giving me the finger, you chart? I'm kind of, I guess. Anyway. Maybe it's not that funny, but I have to pause the video and laugh. Okay, back to this. It is for this reason that I just explained and laughed about that we would request that Zwa and his spouse be issued the appropriate visas. And maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I am, but I don't know. The government, meanwhile, will not provide any details about the visa policy or the criteria it uses to decide who is given this kind of special exemption. A review of annual reports submitted to Parliament by IRCC, which contain a few details about the policy, show that 3,000 of the visas were issued between 2010 and 2017. And something crazy happened in 2015. I don't know what it is, but something crazy. And a whole bunch of those visas got issued. I don't know. Correlation is not causation, blah, 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 blah. But interesting, right? Look at that. Anyway, back to the article. The government would not say how many of these visas were issued for each category of inadmissibility, nor would it say what countries the recipients came from. 3,000 is a lot. Anyway, back to this. The information requested in this media request is exempt under Section 15 of the Access to Information Act, as it could be injurious to the relationship with our international partners, said IRCC spokesperson Remy Laverne in a written statement. The only other details the government would provide about the policy is that it was created to, quote, advance Canada's national interests while continuing to ensure the safety of Canadians, and that recipients of these special visas can work, study, and travel in Canada. Oh, lucky them. In January 2015, the same month he reportedly retired from Egypt's military, Zwa and his wife applied for permission to travel to Canada. Immigration records show their application was then transferred to the CBSA's National Security Screening Division, at which point Zwa was flagged for inadmissibility. How DND became aware of Zwa's application and that it could be rejected is unclear. It's also unclear if Zwa knew he could have been barred from entering Canada, or that he was given a special kind of visa exempting him from national security concerns. I scroll down. Refugee claim triggers concern. Had Zwa and his wife visited their family in Brampton and returned to Egypt, immigration officials would not have revealed that his military past was a concern. It wasn't until the couple made a refugee claim alleging Egyptian intelligence agents mistreated them because Zwa opposed the 2013 coup that Zwa's rank as a brigadier general was disclosed as a problem. Okay, so this circles right back around to this and the excuse of you've got to give him the visa, right? Like, it actually would damage relations, would it not? Like, this guy's now trying to throw the government under the bus and say, no, I'm going to be punished there because I didn't want to go along with that coup. I want to stay here as a refugee. And, well, that damages the Egyptian government, right? Because somebody on the inside, or who was loyal to Morsi and he wants to come to Canada, I mean, that's even more concerning, right? Read between the lines there. But still interesting, right? Weird. Back to the article. Policy is an insidious example of secrecy. While he does not have permission to speak about the case, Zwa's lawyer, Hart Kimanker, excuse me if I've got that wrong, told Global News that he thinks the government's secretive visa program is, quote, troubling. This, he said, is because so many details about the policy are kept secret, and because it creates a double standard where high-profile people the CBSA thinks should be barred from entering Canada are let in, while those who do not have the same power, money, or influence are kept out. Yes, the height of cronyism, right? Just get your buddies in immigration to give you that special letter. Yay. Back to this. The fact applicants don't know they're given a special visa makes the program even more troublesome, Waldman said. That's just officially, right? It could be that they do know they're given the special visa. It could be that they got the reply that they're not allowed to come to Canada for whatever vague reason that is given by the Canadian government. And they make a call because they're high-ranking officials who would know Canadian government officials, right? And say, hey, man, I applied. Did you hear about that? No? Okay, can you help me out? And I'm not saying that that's what happened. I'm just saying that there's potential there, right? Like, if you're a high-ranking government official, odds are probably there's the ability to get in touch with other high-ranking government officials. Back to the article. By staying silent about a person's nefarious past, Canada is signaling to foreign governments and individuals that their actions are okay even when they're not. When there's a political interest to issue a visa, they'll issue it, he said. And if, as the government insists, this program is necessary for maintaining Canada's national interests, then the way the decisions are made and who makes them should be out in the open and subject to independent oversight, Waldman said. By doing it in a secretive, sort of clandestine manner, they're hiding from the public the fact that they're even engaging in this, he said. This is extremely concerning, it is extremely undemocratic, and Canadians have a right to know. And yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that. Link is in the description. And it's incredible, just the things that are happening in our country, that it's too much for anyone to absorb. The mandate letters came out. I haven't even read through most of them. I've been so busy. And like, it's not like my show isn't chocked full of things, right? Like, there are things that are happening that I can't even cover because I just don't have the time, right? Like, I've got limited amount of time. And so I cover what I can, but my goodness, this is the most concerning, moving on from our secret immigration. This is the mandate letter for the Heritage Minister, and the Heritage Minister has been directed to, here's the second point in, well, it says, I will expect you to work with your colleagues and through the established legislative, regulatory, and cabinet processes to deliver on your top priorities. In particular, you will. And the second one is create new regulations for social media platforms, starting with the requirement that all platforms remove illegal content, including hate speech, within 24 hours or face significant penalties. This should include other online harms such as radicalization, incitement to violence, exploitation, of children, of children, or creation or distribution of terrorist propaganda. Okay, so what is the definition of terrorist propaganda? What is the definition of radicalization? What is the definition of incitement to violence? Is saying that Justin Trudeau enjoys blackface something that rises to that level? I don't know, right? And who knows? I can't be the person to make that decision, but this government is the last group of people that I want to have these this very strong mandate letter coming out and underlining the significant penalties they want to levy against social media platforms. All that means is Twitter and all the other ones will go to other countries that don't have this limitation. I mean, my server, Canada Poly, is not on a Canadian server. It is a .com, not a .ca, and that is done for a reason, right? And I'm in Canada, and I make no bones about that. So I'll be bound by those laws, but these are a bad idea, a really, really, really bad idea. And I'm not on board with any of this, and I'm concerned that they'll get it passed. It's very, very frightening, very frightening. The last story, Canadian economy. Yesterday, there was a fiscal update given by the Finance Minister Bill Morneau, and here's the National Post talking about it. It says, Liberal deficit soars to $27 billion, demolishing projections, with another $35 billion in surprise red ink on the way. Yay! The federal deficit under Finance Minister Bill Morneau will balloon over the next fiscal year, leaving the minority Liberal government in a worse fiscal position than expected early in its second mandate. In its fall economic update on Monday, Finance Canada said the deficit would rise to $26.6 billion in 2019-2020, up from an earlier projection of $19.8 billion between 2019 and 2024. Deficits are expected to outpace projections by roughly $35 billion. Ottawa also saw a slight rise in its federal debt to GDP ratio, often cited as a crucial fiscal anchor by Morneau, from 30.8% in 2018 up to 31%. A weaker balance sheet comes amid ongoing worries over trade dispute between the U.S. and China, which has already slowed Canadian exports and business investment. Economic growth over the 5 years between 2019 and 2023 is expected to average 1.8%, a level considered entirely healthy, but still below the Bank of Canada's target rate of 2% inflation. So I wanted to talk to you really quickly about the debt to GDP ratio. They say it's 30%, but I wanted to figure this out a little bit better, and it's actually the CBC that had the most straightforward answer. So here's CBC News reporting, and this was October 2nd, 2019. And that's because the Trudeau Liberals use the debt to GDP ratio as their barometer of health of our debts. But here's the important point. Okay, so the Liberals seem to focus on debt to GDP ratio. What is that measure? I'll talk about it here and then go to my highlights. So the debt to GDP ratio is the federal debt compared to the gross domestic product of the country. In other words, taking the debt and dividing it by the GDP. GDP is what the country produces, right? Like if you produce oil, that's worth $50. If you produce 100,000 barrels of oil, that's 50 times 100,000, right? That's all lumped into the production. That's the lumber, the oil, the gas, the LNG, all of that stuff, all of it. How much, right? So currently, Canada's debt to GDP ratio stands at 30.9%. According to Liberal projections, it will shrink to 32%. For comparison, before Chrétien and Martin embarked on a series of cuts, the federal debt to GDP ratio was 66.8%. It was at its highest in 1946 at 108.9% and its lowest at 1913 at 11.3%. The reason the Liberals like to focus on this measurement is that Canada's debt to GDP ratio is the lowest among G7 countries. For example, the figures for Japan is 237.5% of GDP, 106.7% for the United States, and 99.2% for France. But the figures used by the Canadian government doesn't include the debt from all levels of government, like the provinces and the municipalities. When those figures are included, the ratio, according to the International Monetary Fund, jumps to 88%. And that figure is what I wanted to show you, because I think that's incredible, because, this is a different looking graph. It doesn't look as much like somebody giving you the finger. But here's Canada's debt to GDP, and this is just, I don't want that, trading economics. There was a bunch of other sites that talked about this as well, and all of them had this number, and I couldn't figure out how they were coming to that conclusion, coming to that number, because everything the Liberals put out has the 30.8 or 31%. So I was trying to figure it out, and that's the reason, because they weren't including everything. So this actually breaks it down, and it also gives you a list of the countries in order of actual GDP, right, and debt to GDP ratio, which is in Canada at 89.7% in December 2018, I suppose, last, and previous 90.1, and we're supposed to go up to 90% according to these calculations, these projections. Anyway, there's a bunch of financial news here as well, but I wanted to show you that because I think that it's important news, because I don't know that they could sell this at 89%. Right? But they're selling it at 30%. Anyway, I don't know how they're selling it at 30%. It's a terrible number, but anyway, it doesn't matter. A weaker balance sheet, back to the article, comes amid ongoing worries over a trade dispute between the US and China, which has already slowed the Canadian exports and business investment. Economic growth over the 5 years between 2019 and 2023, 1.8%, a level considered entirely healthy, but still below the Bank of Canada. I've already read that, sorry. The widening deficit is partly the result of an accounting practice that links the perceived future value of public pensions to interest rates. When interest rates decline, the amount owing on pensions and disability liabilities effectively rises, in turn increasing the amount of money Ottawa needs to set aside every year to cover pension expenses. The cost against Ottawa will total $4.9 billion in its next budget and could peak at $7.6 billion in 2021, according to Finance Canada projections. You're seeing the changes in interest rates are driving our liability numbers, Morneau told reporters Monday. A promised tax cut for middle-income earners will also cut the government's $700 million in foregone revenues in 2020, the fiscal update said. Separate election promises made by Trudeau amounted to another $1.5 billion in unplanned expenses. Canada's federal debt-to-GDP ratio, despite an expected rise this year, remains among the lowest in developed countries. Many economists have argued that Canada's larger problem is actually its high level of household debt, which are among the highest in developed nations after 10 years of very low interest rates. Even so, critics point out that Morneau has regularly missed deficit targets after promising in 2015 to run a $10 billion deficit that would be reduced to a surplus in 2019. The Liberals later abandoned any plans to return to balance. They are almost certain to add far more debt than they're ever promising during the most recent election, and they're now going to blow apart yet another deficit-related promise, conservative finance critic Pierre Poilievre said Monday. He's also entering the race for leadership, the last rumor I saw. Back to this. Oil and gas production, including related support industries, contribute 5% to the total Canadian GDP and 14% of exports in 2018. Just to underline how important those are. Just replace that, Catherine Mckenna. So, and despite all of that, despite losing 71,000 jobs, Catherine Mckenna tweets out, while there are some challenges, our economy is sound. More Canadians are working, businesses are doing well, and our economy is growing at a solid pace. In fact, Canada is expected to be the second fastest growing economy in the G7 next year. And here is the story on this one is simply the replies. It's wild. Like, there isn't, I think there's one, like, thank you with a thumbs up, and everyone else is like, you are not correct in your assessment. That's it. And it's quite funny to read through, right? And anybody remember Photo Radar? This is the last story. Anybody remember Photo Radar? I remember Photo Radar. I remember my parents hating Photo Radar. I remember everybody hating Photo Radar. And, well, they brought back Photo Radar. It was like, it was an election issue. It was a provincial election issue. There was like no Photo Radar. So how did they get around it? This is an automated speed enforcement sign. It's not Photo Radar. It's automated speed enforcement. Yeah. Gotcha. It's the same thing. So I kind of hope the province comes in and says, no, you can't do that. Nope. Sorry. Can't do that. But they've already been doing trials and all sorts of other stuff. But so it looks like it might go through, but put up a stink. Photo Radar got taken down after a very short tenure in Toronto, 20 years ago, 25 years ago now. So yeah, but it's back. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com and have a wonderful, wonderful day.